let's talk about legacies, because I mentioned Paul Maurice, and he's one of the big guys that really kind of stands out to me in terms of so much to be written after Game 7. This is a guy that's coached the most games in NHL history without a Stanley Cup until Monday night. 1,985 games. He's been coaching in the NHL for 29 years, which is almost as long as the entire Florida Panthers franchise, only 30 years, 30 seasons. So when you think about Paul Maurice and the emotion that went into it, I wrote a big piece today on dailyfaceoff.com talking about what that legacy looks like and the whole army of supporters that were really pulling for him these last few weeks. I love that he sort of bends over and has a message to the Stanley Cup before he hoists it. He said he had a few choice words about how difficult it was to find it and to get his hands on it, and well-deserved after some of the adjustments that team also made in Game 7.
Look, I say this a lot, Frank. It's not always the best team necessarily going into the playoffs. Sometimes it's the hottest team. Sometimes it's the healthiest team. This is a trophy that is incredibly hard to win. We all thought we'd see the Dallas Stars in the Stanley Cup Finals this year, right? A lot of people picked them. Yeah, Florida was a very, very heavily picked team as well. But again, things come up in the playoffs, whether it was the Winnipeg, Colorado series in round 1. This is Winnipeg's year. It is so difficult to put together 4 rounds of hockey. It is so difficult to not run out of steam, to keep the physical, to keep the mental sharpness it takes when we talk about the margin for error in a 1-goal Game 7. And so that's why it's a trophy that eludes a lot of people. There's a lot of really great players. And, Keith Tkachuk comes to mind for obvious reasons, right? You would not think that he never won a Stanley Cup unless you really follow the game and look at it. I said that to my mom last night because she was watching the celebration. She knew who Keith Tkachuk was. She watched hockey her whole life. She had no idea. She just assumed he won one. There are a lot of Hall of Fame caliber players that never won a Stanley Cup, and there's probably a lot of really, really good coaches that haven't. It's the right time, it's the right place, it's a lot of skill, it's a lot of luck. You need a partner and a GM to put the right players on your roster. And look, when you look back at what the Florida Panthers did over the last 24 months, everything that they did, every lever that they pulled now has paid off. You heard Paul Maurice thank Radko Gudas in particular. I forget who the second name, the Stahl brothers he talked about. I mean, look, that had to be pretty touching for those guys. And he meant that in the heat of the moment, lifting the cup. He's mentioning players not on his roster that help build a culture around his organization. So it's a really tough trophy to win. I was on a team that won it as a first-year player, a 21-year-old. And what I got to witness my teammates go through, there's a reason that most of the guys from that team, actually all of the players from that team, have not won again, right? It is so hard, Frank.
So as we got through, you're always curious who's going to get the cup next after Alexander Barkov became the first Finnish player to captain a team to a Stanley Cup. Whose legacy were you sort of most interested in hearing about or thinking about as last night went on? Was it Sergei Bobovski? Was it Kyle Okposo? Who stood out to you as you were watching Game 7? Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Who were you thinking about?
Probably Bob. And look, Okposo is a U.S. hockey player. He came through the national team. He played at Minnesota. He's been in the realm of the things that I've done throughout my career, and a guy who was a little older than me that I got to watch go through World Juniors, kind of do all that stuff, right? So I'm a big Kyle Okposo fan. But for me, it really was Sergei Bobovski. This is a guy who, went into the playoffs last season not even starting. Okay, Alex Lyons dragged them into the playoffs and then got them into the first round last year before Bob started to take over, right? Spencer Knight, he's had some, player assistance things. He's reinventing himself down in the minor leagues. So you've got the highest paid goalie in the NHL, and I know Carey Price, he's no longer playing, active goalie in the NHL, something people widely criticize. He was incredible for 3 rounds and 3 games. And then all of a sudden, he looked human. He looked beatable. He looked flustered. For him to come back in game 7 and have an elite level performance that he did, and that was the difference in the hockey game in my mind, is that he came up with the few that he shouldn't, and the other guy was not able to. And that's not throwing shade at Stuart Skinner, who I thought was phenomenal as well, but that's just the reality. You've got a big-time goalie with a big-time paycheck who in game 7 was big time. And so to me, for him to get that trophy after everything he's kind of gone through with Columbus and Philly, I remember when they were booing him out of town in Philadelphia, right? So I'm happy to see his legacy have a Stanley Cup. And to me, the guy's a Hall of Famer.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Seravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.